So, dear guests and participants, let's kick it off. We have a very tough schedule. So, because our participants have come from different sessions in this studio, it's more comfortable. It was very hot in the other session. So, we're going to talk about the smart city. This notion is very wide. And we have been proposed discussing particular topics as school on blockchain, museum on big data, so on and so forth. But in fact, we do understand that the real smart city is something which is being shaped. And it is pleasant to know that Moscow is one of the leaders, one of the pioneers in terms of integration, which huge amount. And today we are going to touch upon the most applied and used things to dream about what can be applied and integrated in the foreseeable future and what should be in place for maximum comfort of the city. We are going to answer the golden circle of Simona Sinek: why, how, and what. So let me introduce the participants of our discussion as we move to clockwise. On the left side, I have Eldar Tuzmuhamedov, the head of Smart City Lab, Department of Information Technologies of Moscow City. We have known each other for a long period of time, and it's pleasant to know that all the joint projects of ours have been always supported quite expressively. A number of the projects have been piloted within the World Cup, which took place in Moscow not long ago. Then I would like to introduce Paul Manwaring, the owner of IoT Living Lab and co-owner of City Innovation Exchange Lab. Daryl West. I know that many of you have read at least these 23 books written by Mr. West. I remember that in 2008 in Harvard we were given an example of digital governance as yesterday I took this book on purpose. I found it in the internet. I tried to remember over these 20 years much has been changed, and some ideas and the approach which was fantastic at that moment. You analyzed 10,000 of e-governance and documents. Now it's quite a simple situation. As far as I remember, Darrow published another book connected with the job of the future work, and we're going to talk about it as well. Philippe Boutellier, Director General, Tigil Project, GmbH, the company which is trying to create in the airport building to create the technological center of smart future. If I was explicit at expressing this idea. Let's get it started. Let's start with Darrow. Darrow, you actively studying the question of the artificial intelligence impact and robotics on our life. And as far as I remember, some time ago, your institute published research dedicated to the relation and attitude of Americans to the household robots. And according to the survey, about 61% of respondents said that they didn't feel comfortable close by the household robots and they were afraid to use such kind of robots. And you concluded that the people would change their attitude to robots. But it is not going to happen fast. And they're going to get used to doctors in terms of the Medicare services and robotics, and artificial intelligence is going to be a serious part of infrastructure of the future, if not the major part. I have a couple of questions in this regard. The first question, how the society is ready to live in the smart city with regard, based on this research, people are afraid of robots, are afraid to become the hostages of the artificial intelligence inside robots. Let's answer this question, please, and I'm going to ask you the second question.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation to come here, and congratulations to both of you on the successful World Cup. I'm sure from a technology standpoint, there were many innovations that were demonstrated there. But you're right, the pace of technology innovation is really picking up. I think people are going to be genuinely shocked in every global city how fast the technology revolution takes off, because it's really taking off in a wide variety of areas. You mentioned artificial intelligence, robotics, virtual reality, the Internet of Things. I mean, it's really all converging, and 1 year from now, 2 years from now, and 3 years from now, all of this stuff is really going to accelerate. And so I think people are not really ready. The survey evidence that you just reviewed indicates, at least in the United States, it's kind of a good news, bad news scenario. The good news is people see all this technology taking place, they like the convenience of it, but the bad news is they're really worried about it. They're worried about the invasion of privacy, they're worried about the possible loss of jobs, they're just worried about what's it going to mean for society in general and how it's going to affect the economy. So policymakers do have to understand that on the one hand, everybody wants to push technology, but on the other hand, we're going to have to bring the population along so that there isn't a tech lash that builds up against that. So I do think AI is going to be the transformative technology, because when you think about many of the new applications, driverless cars, they're really about AI. It's no longer about the car. The car is a minor piece of the puzzle. The AI is what integrates the image information, the remote sensing information, does it in real time within 5 to 10 centimeters so you don't hit the car next to you, and that's an extraordinary accomplishment right there.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much. And which city technologies in robotics and artificial intelligence have the bigger potential to be the most fast introduced right now, as we're hearing about the driverless transportation? We do understand that from the terms of the city infrastructure, it is a very important innovation which is going to reduce the number of cars, as we don't need to look for a parking lot. As the driverless car gets you to the place, then it moves to a parking lot, and even car sharing reduces the number of cars. Automatic car sharing, automated parks are going to dramatically reduce the number of cars. But there is a danger, one accident in place, and there is much chaos and uncertainty, danger expressed. Nevertheless, what does it seem to you the most realistic in the foreseeable future can be applied in robotics with artificial intelligence for the city environment?
Part of AI that's going to affect cities the most immediately will be driverless cars, just because that's where the money is going. We've done research comparing driverless cars in Europe, the United States, China, Japan, Korea, and elsewhere, and the automotive companies are investing billions of dollars. The technology companies are doing the same thing. So in the United States, we always have this saying of follow the money. If you follow the technology money, where the big money is going is in artificial intelligence. And it's really going to be driverless cars where people see the most concrete manifestation of that. So for example, in the United States, Uber already has ordered 24,000 driverless cars with delivery starting next year. So we're not talking about something that's 5 or 10 years down the road. Literally, the road testing is going on now. It's generally been successful. There have been 2 fatalities in the United States, so it's not perfect. But in general, the safety record of driverless cars is going to be far superior to humans because in America, 90% of car accidents involve human error. So autonomous vehicles will not get drunk, will not be distracted, and will pay attention to what's going on. But I think the key to artificial intelligence, and I think this is an aspect that will be transformative for cities, is the data piece. Because what digital technology enables is just an enormous amount of data that can be analyzed in real time and then can be used to inform decision making. So the goal is not the technology in and of itself or even the data in and of itself, but how we can use that to make better decisions. Oftentimes, research projects takes months or years to undertake. We're moving into a digital world where the goal is instantaneous turnaround of information so that city planners can make better information choices, that we can integrate ride-sharing data with mass transit data, with traffic congestion data, with where social service offices are located so that cities are organized much more effectively and much more efficiently.
Thank you very much. I do agree that the driverless cars is the backbone of collecting the data, is going to be the fastest integration and introduction and the most comfortable one. So thank you, Daryl, for your answer.
Paul, could you tell us the following? IoT Living Lab philosophy has the idea of future users' engagement into technological products elaboration for the city. And your company speaks a lot about impossibility of smart city without smart citizens, going back to our dialogue with Daryl. So these smart citizens have to take part in elaboration of the smart city, and public space has to be transformed together, as you put it. As far as I understand, in Amsterdam, your effort was used to create large communities of developers that create products for the city, and you regularly test these products on the groups of engaged citizens. So you test the services and you help exchange this data between different cities, innovation centers. Can you give us some examples of the most successful engagement of a community in smart city elements elaboration? What were the ideas? What were the products? What was their life? And what showed the best result in groups? And how did it further on behave in real implementation? And how should the state, the government, from your point of view, approach the wording of tasks of smart cities? Should they go from the needs of the city or from the needs of the citizens? Because it might seem the same thing, but in reality, these are two contradictory wishes and tasks, going back again to the question of privacy and so on and so forth. On the one hand, it is pleasant for us to discuss safety and all video surveillance, but on the other hand, we understand that the big brother is surveilling us everywhere and we do not like it.
Thank you for such a challenging question. I feel a bit put on the spot. To begin with the first part of your question, we are just part of a very large network of 27 living labs in the city of Amsterdam, and the city of Amsterdam has its own CTO office which prototypes. We have data labs which prototype, And we have different silos within the city that are also prototyping innovations. Amsterdam Smart Cities and NGOs, citizen-driven NGOs and initiatives are responsible for hundreds and hundreds of projects. Which ones create the most value is a matter of opinion or marketplace. And I think that the IoT Living Lab philosophy can be more precisely about the Living Lab way of working as opposed to the end result. The Living Lab way of working is about engaging citizens in public spaces and enabling those citizens in a co-development process to contribute to the value generation of products, new products and services using technology in creative ways in public spaces. And that dialogue between the city and the citizen is an organic one, it's an ongoing one. I can give you one example, which will be fairly quick, is very recently we tested a camera from Taipei. We engaged with Taipei in a workshop. This camera is a smart camera, and it identifies bodies, not people, and it anonymizes them instantly and feeds that data to the cloud so that you can look at the number of people and you can differentiate between aggressive and social gestures. So now we tested that, we validated it in a public space, we got some feedback, we got some data, and now we're using that with the University of Applied Sciences to create a baseline of user behavior in public spaces close to their campus. They're going to introduce some interventions, park benches, kiosks, etc., to direct people one way or the other, or to make public spaces more social. That way they'll be able to take this data, which is anonymized, and to put it to good use for the citizen, specifically for the citizen. So we're really about creating situations where people are empowered to generate value and change their lives in living labs by testing and giving feedback and co-developing, right? That's the first part. Whew. So I think what's really important is that we talk about city services and citizen needs coexisting. But there is definitely a shift that needs to take place. Now, the paradigm, the current structural hierarchy, the top-down approach, needs to be replaced by the functional hierarchy, the bottom-up approach, because the top-down solutions are important for infrastructure. We need that infrastructure. We need the city to provide us with roads and to ensure that we have very large infrastructure products and services that benefit us. But as a member of a community, I have more insight to my local problems, and technology is democratized and free, and the city can enable me to work with my citizens and the city to address specific problems. So in living labs, we can test those problems, we can validate them quickly, we can refine them, iterate them, and then they can then generate value very quickly in my community where I care about these problems being solved. I think that the user-centric approach is only one aspect. The living lab way of working is what I want to focus on in the value generation, because whether you have a top-down solution that's provided by a large multinational, you can validate that in a living lab. Then you introduce the social element, and that's where I really want to really focus on with my message, is that whether it's AI, which I think is huge, and I agree with Daryl, is going to really lead technology and decision-making processes for future cities, or whether it's mobility, or whether it's health services, or whether it's education, adding a layer of social validation processes by testing in open spaces using transparent open processes creates a value-generating dialogue that is future-proof.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much, Eldar. And it would be logical, I believe, to ask a question to Moscow. A representative of somewhat similar organization to the one that Paul heads. Moscow is one of the most progressive cities, and when you are implementing and introducing certain solutions, like, for example, I remember how sad the beginning of paid chargeable parking spaces was. So when you are introducing some test pilot projects with citizens, do you arrange some working groups or workshops? As for the logic of the processes, from the very beginning we had quite a reverse path because starting with 2010, 2011, we had a need of very fast and efficient changes of all the system, and we had top-down approach when we said that we are the Department of IT and we need to maximally start our work not on the basis of the opinion of an official, but on the data. We needed to optimize costs, be it computerizing schools or introducing technologies in all other spheres, and they were not silos, but we needed a system when, for example, registration card in polyclinic can be integrated with schools, when we can correlate it with, for example, when a kid skips a class at school, we need to see whether they have consulted a doctor, a physician, and we can either advise the mother to take her kid to the physician or, I don't know, do something else. And we introduced bottom-up approach in 2014, where we had services such as an active citizen, when citizens can vote for a tree to plant or whether they need a kids' playground or work ground. And we launched a crowdsourcing platform, and we started incorporating it all after we have launched all the systems from top to down, from top to bottom. Only afterwards we started engaging citizens and started asking whether it was okay or not. Yes, and not acting like starting with some really small projects in different regions without having centralized systems in the city. And now AI is being used in a powerful way, but not well seen everywhere. And very often, if you call a call center, the one who answers your call is a robot. And there is a certain ratio of citizens who start shouting, "I don't want to talk to a robot, connect me to a living human being." We have statistics that shows that there is a certain ratio of people who say like that. So they are asked, "Would you like to ask a question about this?" And they shout, "No, not about that. I want a living being." And we conducted polls of Muscovites to see what they would like to have in the city of the future. So that is bottom-up approach. And 64% say that it is personalized healthcare. And personalized healthcare, and here I will argue with Daryl, is an area where we can see effects of AR introduction faster than in a driverless car. 52% wanted to see smart home, and the third place somehow that was artificial intelligence managing the city. So that was their response. I believe that was because of transparency, because they trust the robot more in certain matters than traditional official. Maybe what they meant is that AI should clean the snow in winter and so on and so forth. And a lot want VR, AR just because they believe it is cool. So that is the citizens that we have in our city, and that is their observations. As for the cars and where AI can be implemented faster, first of all, that is chatbots. So when you call a call center, you talk to these bots, and very often we will launch an application where you would be able to ask how much should I pay for the parking, and the bot will answer to you 500 rubles, pay not pay, and that is AI. And for example, you receive a notification of a fine and a sad smile. Or if you have some notification from the mayor and Mr. Sabanian says, "Dear Irina Nikolaevna, today active longevity program is launched in your region, and it is not Mr. Sabanian who pushes the button. It is the bot that analyzes the data on jobs and geolocation to send the information that this or that citizen needs in a certain moment of time in a certain place." And now we are struggling hard with the Ministry of the Emergency not to send notifications about hurricanes every 5 minutes, which they do now. As for the healthcare, now we have 85% of precision in cancer identification, and we understand that AI can process data like city images, X-ray, and MRT cardiograms, and at GitHub we have this information. You can download it. We share it with other cities. You can launch your own neural networks. Before all the cities will invest into massive capex to outfit the cities with driverless cars. Ildar, and have you somehow communicated with Paul? Have you exchanged any information? No, we haven't. I will add him in LinkedIn after we finish, and I am sure we will start cooperating actively. And we have VPN. You know that we are a smart city. But don't voice that to federal bosses. And I had one question to Paul. So what I said about active citizen platform, when we ask the citizens what kind of playground they need, or for example, if they want a workout station, or our crowdsourcing platform where around 70,000 citizens, or even more than 100,000 citizens, were asked about the functions of new libraries. Can it be considered a living lab, or is it something different? Just in Moscow, we would like to be specific because we have targets, we have budgets, and so on and so forth. So the story about crowdsourcing and so on and so forth is always interesting to us. It is interesting for us to see how Europe and other cities work. So is it a living lab when citizens themselves come up with ideas to use libraries, or they decide on their own what they need to have in their courtyard?
Sorry about the delay, but yes and no. That's difficult to say because actually there's citizen activation. That's bottom up. It's just organic. I think that if you want to quantify, then you start talking about labs. If it's organized in such a way that you can analyze the data or the user behavior to get feedback, it can be feedback from using focus groups or doing surveys, which we do. What's good to have is data layers on top of that as well to then contribute to quantifiable data. So you can objectify that and get some very valid data so you can inform that decision-making process and that co-development process. So I would say, yes, all crowdsourcing is almost living lab, but you do need an analytical data layer on top of that, in my opinion.
Just the data layer.
It's nice to have.
Okay.
Yeah. Otherwise, you're just talking about opinions.
So it shouldn't be a physical co-creation.
Co-creating is a process that is enabled by living labs, and that's not necessarily an end product. Living labs can give you information about what not to do as well.
Спасибо, Эльдар, спасибо.
Thank you, Ildar, and thank you, Paul. I believe that now it will be really very interesting and organic to ask Philip a question. Philip, you had a large project of renovating of Tegel Airport in Berlin that has to turn into technological hub. First of all, I would like to learn whether it was easy to agree on this kind of project. I might be mistaken, but I believe that there were some issues with citizens that were unwilling to have their airport transformed into anything of that kind. So how was this idea born, and how positive do you think experience obtained in the closed ecosystems should be replicated? For example, in Moscow, we have an ideal test bed, pilot area that we believe we would deploy further on to other metropolises. So can we say that it works or does not work?
So I hear several questions on that. The first one is about the population and the public vote we recently had in Berlin on keeping the airport open as an airport instead of, closing it down. That was not a vote on the reuse or the conversion into a technology park, an industry park for future technologies. That was a vote on, would you like to keep the good old world as it is? And do you trust in the new airport that's currently being built that it will be sufficiently efficient for the city? And So if you ask people whether they would like change, typically the answer is no. If you ask people about the perfect smart city or the perfect future city and you talk to adults, typically you get very boring answers. If you talk to kids, it gets very interesting because they are very creative. And all of a sudden you are at the flying cars and, and the immediately automatically, robotically delivered hamburgers and, sort of that stuff. They are much more creative in thinking about future cities. And sort of the whole idea of our project is we have a gift there, a gift of a huge area of 500 hectares, sort of 5 square kilometers or 2 square miles, inner city location, prime location, and it will be freed up in 2 years from now. And the question was, so what are we going to do? And we actually had an open process and we asked the population. We didn't present them with possible plans, but we asked them, what do you actually want? So all stakeholders of the city were invited. It happened in 2008. And from this open process, the current master plan evolved over several years. And one part, let's say sort of a third, is a hub for future technologies. We call it the Urban Tech Republic. A bit is a residential project, a smart city project, very ambitious, not in size but in scope, for 10,000 people, sustainable, inclusive, sponge city concept, sort of all very smart. We can talk about that later. And then a huge green park for the city as a green lung. So those are the 3 projects I'm managing in a way. And no one is criticizing that. Everybody loves it. So the decision was not about the project as such, because it's very stable. It's one of the popular projects, but about the airport and aviation and sort of public infrastructure. There are a few more things. One is sort of how do you design, let's talk about the Urban Tech Republic, how do you design, or Skolkovo here in Moscow, how do you design the perfect environment for the creation of future technologies? And the answer is there is no perfect solution. It depends very much on the circumstances. What we are doing is we looked at hundreds of parks, sort of from Valley to wherever. And those that are successful, all of them have a university in the center. It's always the academia, the research, the innovation at the heart, and only those actually work. And then you've got the startup facilities, technology centers around it. And on top, we not only have commercial stuff, but we have industry space, sort of large production facilities or space for large production facilities, so that industry, research, startups all come together in one space to work on future technologies. And sort of that's one part of the secret sauce. And the other part is that we created experimentation zones where already in the zoning plan we fixed certain areas where industry in future can test stuff. There's a test road, there's space for autonomous driving, a lab, we have open infrastructure channels, so underground facilities for all the infrastructures, so that you can play around with sensors and you don't have to dig up the road again. And we have developed our own street lamps, sort of multifunctional lampposts, basically, where all the sensors are, the cameras and everything. So it's a very experimental environment. And if the stuff succeeds in our environment, then it gets replicated into the city. Exactly. So that's the whole idea of it.
Thank you.
And actually, I'd like to disagree with Daryl a bit.
Okay.
On the autonomous driving.
You're the second person on this panel to do that.
Not in principle, but in general. Sort of, I do agree that autonomous driving is that sector that's currently best financed and where we'll see most progress, but not in all cities. So it very much depends on the city and the culture. Just imagine an autonomous car with the safety features in Mexico City, where the gun in front of the cars, robbery is sort of a daily thing, and the autonomous car will stop if someone steps on the road. Or even in Berlin, if people discover that cars stop when they step on the road, there will be anarchy. Sort of everybody will step on the road and just ignore the cars. So the trick is, well, let's put it, cities are probably the most chaotic systems that were ever created by human beings. And now we are currently trying, let's say generation 1 of autonomous driving, to build AI systems that are following rules. So we are defining the rules. But in order for a city to work, you have to step over rules from time to time. You have to to include rule-breaking behavior, and then all of a sudden you're in deep shit with your algorithms. So open for discussion.
Maybe we should talk about flying cars or hovering unmanned vehicles, not for ordinary vehicles which drive on the road. Yeah. And due to that, we will solve problem with robbers. Okay. К сожалению, к нам сегодня не смог.
Unfortunately, we couldn't have the representative of Yandex company, which last week introduced smart station, smart gas station, like Amazon, Google Home, Echo. As I was going to talk about it, I'm going to ask all the participants, how do you see? It's clear that for smart home, for smart house, such smart stations are an integral part. They perform the orders, they just switch on media, music, they can manage different number of devices. Is it possible to use something similar in industrial, in the scales of the cities? When there's going to be some echo in the perimeter of the city and managing. Of course, when the 5G is going to be implemented and IoT is going to be seen in every micro district linked to IoT. Is there any place for such assistance in the city? Who is going to answer this question?
I can make an attempt to answer that. I do think there are going to be a lot of applicability of smart home innovation to the city at large. So, for example, in smart homes, energy sustainability is absolutely crucial part. The whole green technology movement, turning out lights when people are not using particular rooms, that has great applicability to office buildings. We often go past large office buildings at night and all the lights are on, and there aren't that many people working there. And so just kind of figuring out how to handle resource management in the home as well as in office buildings and other places around the city, I think would be very important. There's an interesting smart appliance application that's emerging in the sense that part of the Internet of Things is there's just going to be sensors everywhere, including in the homes and in the refrigerators, to let you know when you're about to run out of milk, kind of send you a text message, stop and get milk on the way home. That type of interactive system has broad applicability to organizational decision making in general, kind of sending us reminders based on automated sensors, kind of noticing the air quality seems bad today, or traffic is bad today, or fill in the X, something is problematic today, and you should take reactive steps to deal with that. I also think digital personal assistants are going to grow in applicability. They're kind of starting out as entertainment devices in the home to manage your music and entertainment choices, but they have much broader applicability in the workplace in terms of just helping people deal with mundane and routine administrative tasks of filing your hours or requesting sick time or dealing with some benefit claim. We all spend an endless amount of time on the administrative parts of our job as opposed to doing the real part of our job. Digital personal assistants can really help improve and augment people's abilities, I think, in ways that are applicable for cities in general.
I'm going to go crazy on this one. I'm writing a book right now, and I foresee a future where communities have community assistants in the form of AI. I don't think that in the future we're going to need local politicians as much as we're going to need a rational agent to help us make sense of all the data that is going to create valuable insight into decision-making processes in the future. Now, AI can make great decisions based on rational data, rational decisions. So it can give you great suggestions, but it doesn't have a very good capability of making a value judgment in human context. So if we add social validation techniques to inform algorithms, we can actually symbiotically create decision-making assistants that are going to really help us create efficiencies as far as the energy transition goes, or how we save water, which we're going to need to do in the future, because if population continues to grow at this existing rate, we'll be out of fresh water by 2030. So energy efficiency, water savings, circular economies, sustainability, and then we got food, and how we utilize all these things to produce food in productive ways to feed a growing population. The data is huge, and AI can really help us. And we can give AI that human context.
And that is a representative of a city. Many things have been discussed about smart homes and the special devices for smart homes. As a government, we differentiate the zone before the apartment and the zone inside the apartment as a function of a city. We should think about the capex, and within this zone of administration influence the smart home system. It cannot enter just by definition. There is a privacy level with trespassing restrictions, but from the perspective, as Philip has been saying, about the projecting the car, about designing the system for driverless cars, when we can have the rules pre-programmed within which everything is going to develop. That's what we're doing right now. It is not on the principle of the open infrastructure. Currently, we have specific telemetrics on heating, on water, on power, with 100% of all the state authorities' buildings and from all the residential units from the city. So the question is how to enter the flat, an apartment, and to have a smart meter. Now we are developed our special platform for any producer of meters or any company which installs these meters can, using a very simple reason, through the home Wi-Fi, get access to our system and start without any through access, without any filing of documents, automatically send the data at the platform which has the access of any personal gadget, of any personal device. We're going to announce it a little bit later, and we're going to persuade you to install such kind of meters, not to think about the sustainability. We have a huge number of surveillance cameras. It is very difficult to increase the number of these surveillance cameras, but to improve the system of surveillance and safety is better, to open IP, so every person who has installed a video register in his car through a particular protocol can send this data, if he wants to do that, to the city system of video surveillance. So some is done in healthcare system, education system. All the fans are the fitness bracelets. So we're thinking how to turn the system of integration of access, so for your personal bracelet, with your willingness, of course, to send your information on your heart beating, on how many calories you burn, how many steps you make, to your doctor, to your personal doctor. So we cannot buy a gadget for every citizen, but we can give the opportunity for your own gadgets to be coordinated with our city systems of interaction with those professionals who are going to provide the expertise. That's what I think about the personal devices. That's what we have been working on in all these three areas. Moscow is stunning in terms of the pilots and approaches. It seems that the particular opinion with Tom Cruise movie is going to be a reality when every window is going to offer something to buy, and our personal sensor is going to send online information, and this information is going to be processed by a big smart home for the city, and you'll be said that urgently you need to go and give some medical tests because you have some disease. That's great, so thank you very much. I would like to give 1-2 minutes for every speaker, for our distinguished participants, to say a couple words about how, from your own perspective, major driver right now. What is a major driver right now which makes us make smart cities? What we used to live in cities, everything was quite well, but by accident everything is changing. This is environment, and this is hype. So okay, you're going to be the first to answer this question. Hype. This is fashionable. Of course, it's not fashion. In our city, we have 3 basic tasks, which pushes us to integrate innovations. This is kind of a service. We should understand that the city, in fact, is a single competitive landscape with Google's Facebook and without the application of Yandex Taxi. So you're comfortable at using this taxi. Why isn't it comfortable for you to pay for utilities? So you do understand this is the interface. We got used to the service itself. So the task of the city is to provide the service to their clients. So we're not in a paradigm where there is an official and the subject who is a citizen, but we're your client service, who's your concierge, which helps you to exist and to live in the city. The second story is, of course, about the effective spending in order to reduce this spending and to allocate this spending at the right direction. We need to have this special engagement system. The main source of information is data. And probably the fourth story is about the security and safety, about the reliability of infrastructure system. There are more and more areas of city we are dependent on the connection, on the road, on the infrastructure in place. And the third task, which is solved by us and innovation of development, this is the reliability and stability on the infrastructure itself.
Daryl said something very important in his first statement, and that is that the speed of change is increasing. And many people are already overwhelmed by what's going on currently, and all statistics basically confirm that. But then again, we can't stop progress, and the speed is increasing, and for those who think it's too fast, I can only say sort of hold on to this moment, because it will never be as slow again as it is now. For our session we had the blockchain in the title and the IoT. We haven't touched that at all so far. The IoT bit a bit, but not the blockchain part. I think the greatest hindrance on this way to the smart city, which I don't like at all as a term, by the way, but that's a different story, is privacy concerns. It's a very technological discussion. Sort of was triggered sort of in the sort of late zeros by IBM and other companies who discovered the city as a new business opportunity. And we have two cultures. One is the of the technologists, and the other one is the of the urbanists. And so basically, this divide is so striking, and there are only very few people, probably someone like Ilda, like myself, sort of who come from a technology background and have worked for and with cities for so many years that we are technologists sort of turned urbanists in a way, but there are not that many of us who can translate between these two cultures. And that's probably the greatest responsibility that we have, sort of to bring the two together in a meaningful way. But privacy issues are my greatest concern currently. And blockchain, I think, is a wonderful opportunity because it provides the power, the sovereignty over my personal data back into my hands. And I can choose where I opt in with what part of my data and for how long, and I can sort of take it back again. Sort of this controlled flow of information where I keep control. That could be a game changer. If not, it's difficult.
So I think when I'm thinking about the drivers of change in Europe and in the United States, government, business, and civil society are all driving change, but in different kinds of ways. And I agree with a number of the points that Philip just made. Government, there's a competition now across megacities, global cities. Like everybody wants to be a smart city. So when Moscow sees Amsterdam doing something, or Berlin sees something going on in Moscow, it's like, people want to do that and then do the next step as well. So that drives change. But I would also not underestimate the people as a driver of change, in the sense that, especially when we're seeing in virtually every country around the world public disenchantment with their government, lack of accountability, questions about performance. It's certainly true in the United States, and it's true many places elsewhere. Technology can become part of the vehicle to help reintroduce accountability. So last year I was in China, and as I was going through the Beijing International Airport, so the first government official you deal with in any country is the passport officer. So I hand my passport, and then I happen to look down, and there was a small device there where I could rate that bureaucrat on a 1 to 4 scale on that bureaucratic encounter. And I thought, wow, you want to talk about brainstorming, like that's a radical idea that the public can evaluate every bureaucratic interaction. I'm not sure I would want that kind of accountability in my job, but you know, it's an example of how technology and the public's disenchantment with traditional government might help drive a lot of change in the future.
I agree with Daryl. You can't underestimate the power of the people. For me, the question and the answer is obvious. People drive change. Technology enables that change. People adopt that technology and use it in smart ways. I again hold the opinion that there are no such thing as smart cities. There are smart people who create smart cities by using technology in intelligent and effective ways. What I think is going to drive the future is cities working together with people on more inclusive platforms. Now, so I'll go back to blockchain. I'm very interested in how blockchain can enable these meaningful interactions, because using the power of cryptocurrency, for instance, to encourage people to adopt healthier lifestyles, or to reduce CO2 emissions, or to incentivize communities to adopt water-saving practices, is a real quantifiable and valuable way that we can use technology and people in a symbiotic relationship that's going to generate value very quickly in a time where that change is absolutely urgent.
Я от себя еще добавлю про людей. Меня вот всегда
And I will add something about people here, and I totally agree with you that it is not our goals or tasks, but the citizens themselves that drive progress. And we have a good example. In 2010 or 2011, in online mode via smartphone, we provided 5 or 7 public services. As for the rest, citizens had to go for some paper in one thing, put a stamp on that paper in another place, and go to yet another place to bring that paper and prove it, and so on and so forth. And now we have much more, hundreds of services via mobile app, and citizens now say that your app is very slow and your page is browsed not for a second but in 3 seconds, and we do not like it a lot because we think 5 years ago you obtained this service in a week and now you obtain it in 3 minutes. But these demands, so to say, of citizens are the thing that make us work. And apart from citizens, there is also such a thing as competition. And strange as it might seem, we truly sense it. Because if you do not provide as a service as cool as Uber, for example, you would receive dissatisfied citizens who would not understand why it is so easy to order Uber and so hard to pay for housing and utilities, and why it is so easy to buy a ticket to the Bolshoi Theater in one click and so hard to go to visit a doctor. Thank you very much, Eldar. And I would add that competition in modern conditions when the whole world is not simply transparent but also borderless, we also have to think about competition on where people would live. And I, for example, with my background and experience, remember that when borders started being eliminated and transparency was developed, it was hard for us to retain our employees, because if our office was not comfortable enough, our employees could opt for Berlin. And now you are wearing Facebook T-shirt. Yes, I am. And thank you very much. I believe that we have answered all the what, how, and why questions. We started with what, then continued with how, and ended with why. And I have another question about blockchain. May I? Yes, please. We are piloting and testing blockchain in the city. Everybody knows how to use Active Citizen, and Active Citizen runs on blockchain because we had certain questions on transparency, even in the voting for the tree to be planted in the courtyard, because some persons started saying that they wanted to have poplars, not fir trees, and so on. And now we need increased transparency in the system of street fairs, and we are going to launch it when an application is sent in online mode for fair, and some applicants say that the process is not transparent. So if we use blockchain and it registers all the sequence of all the applications, we would be able to say to that person, you were the hundredth, not the fifth, therefore you did not receive this location. And the question I have is that a lot of people say that blockchains are so cool, but can I ask you to drive one example that is the most promising and the most striking, an example of specific implementation of blockchain in the city? What do you know? And can you be maximally fast, please, because we need to finish.
Which is, I think the security area is the example where blockchain is going to take off, more so than the cryptocurrency, which I think governments are never going to allow that to really take over their control of the currency. But the security area just has broad applicability for government agencies, for private businesses, for civil society, just because of that trust component. So I think, you know, that idea is a great application right there.
In Amsterdam, they just passed a policy for the next 4 years to create open algorithms. So we're going to do algorithm inventory for companies that use algorithms to influence buying behavior or other behaviors in people. So we're going to apply open AI and open algorithm practices for the government, and blockchain will make a difference as an additional layer to traditional monetary systems by incentivizing people in ways that they are in charge and they generate the value in open and transparent ways.
My government doesn't know what blockchain is.
В общем, блокчейн
So blockchain is all about transparency. Transparency is all for us. Thank you very much, dear participants, and we have time left for one question from the audience, if we have any. I have a question and a comment. So the comment is, why are you talking about cities when, for example, driverless transportation in agriculture, for example, introduction would free a lot of time and effort? And another thing, question, what application would you advise to the user, to active citizens, to store personal information about health? Because sometimes you just forget what you had and when. Answering your first question, that is urban forum that we are at now.
По поводу агрикультуры, на самом деле в городах искусственный интеллект.
And as for agriculture, in the cities, AI is used, and we are considering together with the colleagues different standards that would enable us to use air photo shooting to see how the greenery is treated in these or those areas of the cities. And as for where to store data, that is not a question to Moscow government. International experts, I believe, will give you a hint.
Is precision agriculture, because farmers are going to be able to use sensors to determine the moisture level of the soil. You know, what's the best time to plant the crops? At what point, you know, do you need to add supplements or fertilizers? So, but the reason people devote a lot more attention to smart cities as opposed to smart agriculture is within a couple of decades, 70% of the world is going to live in cities, so it's like we're focused on cities.
Последний вопрос.
Last question, please. Good afternoon. Question from Bashkiria. A question about big data and personal information. Do you think that personal data is a barrier, or personal data use restriction is a barrier, and big data restriction is a barrier to telecom operators, for example? Because now, knowing the behavior of the consumer, where they live, where they go, companies can send offers to consumers that make them really afraid. So do you think that imperfections in legislature are a barrier for technologies development and big data use in urban planning and urban management? Thank you.
Okay, I'll try. Personal data is, in Europe, a very, now more of a clear issue. In Amsterdam and in the Netherlands, it's a mandate that personal data is you own it and you can control it. And there's more initiatives about making people aware of what their digital rights are. Then, as that data becomes part of what you call collective data, it can become anonymized to generate value. So data platforms that are owned and operated by the city that are transparent do also at the same time have accountability, not just to its citizens, but also to generate value. So you have to have a reason behind collecting and maintaining and distributing that data. I think that eventually we just all have to recognize the fact that we also have our digital selves to maintain along with our physical selves. I hope that answers the question.
Все, к сожалению, мы вынуждены закончить, хотя явно...
Regrettably, we have to finish, though the topic is really very interesting. And I would like to thank our distinguished experts and guests for participation. I believe that we have had really very live discussion, and we have managed to talk about some things that everybody is concerned with, and that is an inherent part of our future. Thank you very much.